Today we're going to talk a little bit about a sand table and its uses on prescribed fire training. A little bit of background on it. The military used it for many, many years to set up battlefield simulations in which they would run battlefield commanders through. It's an opportunity to do some real-life simulation without actually getting shot. Firefighting community bought into it about 7 or 10 years ago. Same thing, we use it primarily at first for wildfires, how to set up a situation where it would attack a wildland fire. Again, doing a simulation without having real fire on the ground. And now we can use it for prescribed fire training or other opportunities to do simulations. The concept is real simple. It's just a box. You can make it any size you want to. This is probably a 4x4. I've seen them 8x4, whatever size you want to make it on, depending on your audience. Fill it with sand. This kind of sand you can buy anywhere. And then some buckets that you can scoop the sand out of, put them in the buckets, and you take the sandbox with you anywhere you want to go. Just put on some sawhorses or a table, and you have your sandbox built. And then as far as the material for it, you're only really limited by your imagination on how you want to set up your sandbox. In this example, these are just some trees that you can buy at a hobby store or any kind of toy shop. Here's some foam blocks that were cut out in the shape of houses, took a permanent marker, drew windows and doors just to demonstrate that this is a home. You can buy yarn, different colors of yarn to make different kind of control lines. This could be a creek bottom, waterway, it could be a gas line, anything that you wanted to use it for. It's good to have different colors of yarn. Here's a good red, is a good example of a downwind control line, for example. It's going to be very hot. And you could have different colors for different kinds of roadways. You could call this a blacktop road. You could have one for a county road. You could have one for a disc line, a compression line, a black line, however you want to do it. You don't have to get so. You can go to the store and buy little Hot Wheels cars. These are about $1.50 a piece. You can buy the small plastic ones, a bag of them for $2. Not very expensive at all. You're just really limited by your imagination. I think it is important to have some kind of on some sandbox kits. I know I cut out a little arrow, and that's always been a wind arrow. That's the direction the wind is from. That is so essential not only in our wildland fire suppression, but our prescribed fire planning. Is always knowing where that wind's from, where we want to plan it from, and how that's going to affect the different fire behavior within the unit. But you don't have to get very fancy at all. Here's a half a pencil. You can stick that in there and call it a windmill. You can call it a gas well, an oil well, whatever you want to be. I would encourage you not to get hung up on trying to find exact replicas of windmills and oil wells and homes. It's just, as the kit here is, very simple. You could probably spend $15 and have an outstanding kit to take with you to show the different things that you might be doing out there. I mean, you can buy the tractors and the discs and the plows and all those things that are really neat, but you don't have to spend a lot of money to do it. So I've used spray paint to set up other kinds of scenarios where green for a wheat field, black for roads. Just however you want to set it up, you're limited only by your imagination. So the intent today is just to show you how you could use a sandbox, building different scenarios in which to demonstrate different techniques for prescribed fire training. Instead of using a PowerPoint or other type of chart, just kind of more interactive. Some other things is, once you set up the scenario, you want to be very specific on what the students are looking at. Make sure you label or describe what is north, what is east, what is south. In here, I just drawn on a napkin the wind direction. This is a handy tool, so the students always can have an idea of the different wind directions. They want to be as knowledgeable as possible on the scenario as you set it up. One of the great things about sand is you can make terrain with it. Just playing the sandboxes like a kid, you can make bluffs. It's handy to have a little water, a bottle of water where you can squirt, kind of mold the sand and get it to set up the way you want it to set up. You can show how fire affects different terrain types and some considerations you would need in establishing control lines, for example, on a side slope. So that's one of the great things about the sand table. Again, as I mentioned, these are just little toys that you can buy at a Walmart or any other type of a local toy store. And you can, don't have to be fire trucks, you can buy ATVs, farm tractors. who's your audience. Those are the kind of things that you might want to buy. Little ATVs, whatever you want to do. But again, set up the scenario. And if you want it to be, of course, you want it to be interactive. So the better you set up the scenario, the better feedback and interaction you're going to get with the audience that you're dealing with. So at a scenario I have here, for example, what we've done is we've taken this black and white yarn and we could call this a highway, a typical blacktop highway in the state of Kansas, and it makes a little corner. Then I've taken the red yarn and outlined the downwind perimeter, which we'll call a downwind perimeter in this case. And you can explain, well, what is this control line going to be? Is it going to be a mow line? Is it going to be a kill line, a plow line? Those kind of things that you can talk about in the classroom. And then some of the considerations. In this example here, I put some trees, which could be a shelter belt on the downwind perimeter of this control unit. Now, depending on your objectives, where do you want to put the control line? Do you want to put it on the outside of the shelter belt, then you risk burning up the shelter belt, then you put it on the inside. So those are things where you can actually get the students out, get them involved in the decision making. And if you were going through an entire burn plan, you could actually build the burn unit in the sandbox that you're talking about throughout the course of the day. And then as you talk about different things, objectives, types of control, different types of control lines, weather parameters, sensitive features like homes, you can always come back, talk about it a little bit, then come back to the sand table and then talk about how you would make a decision. How would you write your burn plan in order to get the burn done safely and meet the different objectives? So again, it's a good interactive way to get the students involved in the self-learning process, which was very important for adult education. That's what we're dealing with here. In the scenario here, again, in your toys, so to speak, don't have to be elaborate. I just stuck a pencil in. You could, really simple, you could call it a windmill, you could call it a gas line, anything. You're just limited by your imagination, but it's important that you set up the scenario really well for the students so they understand what's going on. One of the things you can talk about, again, and it's important to have something there indicating which way the wind direction is going to be. You can talk about how to do different ignition sequences. So in this example, where we have the highway on the south side, and we'll pretend that we have a disc line on the north and on the west side, how would you go about lighting that? What are some of the different ignition techniques you could use? And I'll go through an example, maybe how I would do it, and then again, you could do it however you wanted to do it. So in our example, if we have the right side, on my right side of the box being the south, and my left side of the box being north, and west side being closest to me, if we have a south wind, how would we light this unit? How would we do it safely? Well, we could, and I'll just use some toys as an example of how I would move my resources throughout the course of the burn. In this example, we do have a shelter belt that we don't necessarily want to burn down. We have a windmill in the unit. The blue yarn is a two-track trail into the unit. Perhaps it would be important to point out. And then in my example here, we have two homes, one on each corner of the burn unit that we want to, of course, protect from any damage of fire. So what we would just go about an example of trying to define how we would want to write into our burn plan how we're going to implement this unit. So with the south wind, we're going to want to start a test fire up in the north, in this particular unit, up in the northwest corner, and we break up the ignition team into two different teams, each going different directions, and the intent is to establish a control line on the downwind perimeter, get that nice backing fire in, and you can just kind of show them, just go through an example, or have them explain to you how they would go about it. And one of the neat things about this is lots of folks, including myself, are very hands-on visual folks. So being able to visualize it, go through it, a demonstration, and then it helps you go on and put it on a piece of paper, how to write down exactly how you want to make the plan work. And you would just show throughout the course of the day how the resources would move down the different fire line until you get the downwind perimeter secured, a nice backing fire going, and then it wouldn't be until at that time, and then you would start moving resources on, lighting the head fire across the unit. Now in this example, let's pretend whatever structure here, I called it a windmill earlier, it could easily be a gas well or an oil well that we want to light around. We could show that as the teams move down the downwind perimeter, that you would have a third group come in, light around that structure that needs to be saved, and then exit the unit. The key on there is when the timing would be very important. That's one of the good things about this tool is you could show that you're not going to go in there into the middle of the unit until you have the downwind perimeter really well secured. And then you could light your head fire. In this case, a simple grassland unit, you could go in and trees keep falling down. You could go in and light the head fire. Very simple opportunity to use a sandbox, hands-on demonstration that you can take and then move to a written plan of some sort. Some other things you can do with this is that not all units, depending on the type of units, depending on the type of fuel models you're using, and the objectives is you want to use a simple model like that. You might have some kind of odd-shaped control line, and you could actually put that control line in, and how would that change your ignition sequence? If this was a pretty simple, straightforward one that everybody uses in Kansas, starting on the downwind side and moving in opposite directions until you get the downwind side secured and then lighting the head fire. That's pretty common. But what happens if you have corners and zigzags in your downwind control lines? That's an excellent example to go through a thought process for your students to go through a thought process of how would you light that, and then how would you take that and transpose it over to your burn plan. So another handy use for the sand table. What's really good, what's most important about the sand table is really being able to facilitate the discussion. So once you set it up, what I encourage you to do is have some really well-defined instructional objectives. What kind of goals do I want to reach in this particular unit? And then you as the instructors not necessarily go through it all, but appoint somebody, ask for a volunteer from the class, have them explain to them what's going to be happening, what the goals and objectives, what are you going to teach, and then have them go through their thought process, and you facilitate that, where you give them opportunities to come forward safely and allow them to present their ideas on how to do that particular objective. In our example here, if we had a very odd-shaped unit, how would we light that given a certain wind direction? And it's important for you to facilitate it is if you get one person to come up and do it, to go through it with the rest of the classes, that you ask the rest of the classes kind of to be quiet and allow the other person to think, and then once you go through it all, give an opportunity for feedback. What would work well, what wouldn't work quite so well in that example given. So, and then rotate different units through different students, let everybody get involved in the presentation. That's an excellent way to teach, especially for adult learners, which is our primary audience, is to get them involved into the decision-making process, let them think out loud, and work with their hands is an excellent opportunity for them to learn. It really enhances what you tell them, which in your instructional method, just supports what you're teaching there. Let's say that we have a jog in our downwind control line, and we have a home. And a lot of our homes in Kansas have a nice cedar shelter belt around to cut off that winter wind. And in this situation, and then let us say again that to my left is the north side of the box, is north. My left is the north side, my right is the south side, the west side is to me, and then we have a typical southeasterly wind, or southerly wind here in Kansas. How would we light this particular unit? In this case, we have several downwind corners. We have a corner here, then over here someplace we have another downwind corner. How would we go about lighting that particular unit? Lots of folks will start in this corner and then move to the east. But what they find is when they come around the corner here is that the fire is will push them up the corner. So instead of starting in the corner, how would we on this odd-shaped unit, how would we deploy our resources? So in that sense, typically we wouldn't come back. We might have to do two different things there. What's our most sensitive thing we have to protect? In this case, it's the house, the shelter belt around the home. So we might want to start in this corner, and resources moving in opposite directions, realizing that these resources here are going to be being pushed a little bit by the wind. And here's your job as the facilitator, is to talk to them. What kind of things are you considering what things are going to be happening in this situation. And hopefully the students would be saying, well, this is our most important feature, we're going to protect that, that's why we're going to start lighting here. But what happens is we're going to be being pushed in a couple different directions. So maybe there's different ways to do things, and this might also help you define the number of folks you need. In this case, it may be beneficial for you to have, instead of just 2 different teams, 4 different teams lighting simultaneously in this example, where you're starting in 2 downwind corners and kind of working towards each other to secure the area. Now that requires more people, and so then you need to add that to your burn plan. Instead of a typical square 80 acres, it still may be 80 acres, but we might have several odd corners in it that requires more people as the complexity of the unit. So that's a great example, showing it this way, in that you could take a square 80 acres, do it with 4 people, or 6 people, or 8 people, however you decide it. You could have the same 80 acres that's very odd shape and realize you might need 12 or 16 people. But have them go through the thought process. How would you do this? Ideally, how would you want to do this? Again, that allows them to take those ideas and then put it on a piece of paper, the thought process. Think out the thought process out loud. And you want to allow them to do it in a very safe manner. Again, and you're controlling it as a facilitator. You shouldn't allow anybody else to speak. Let them think through it. Maybe you need to take a few notes, capture some thoughts. Don't interrupt them. Let them go through the process, and then when they're finished, come back and discuss it. And then use very strong supporting statements. This was a good idea, but what if we did it this way instead of coming back hard against them? That allows for open, free communication with all the students, and that's important to get going with. A lot of our audiences, especially in this part of the world, very conservative, don't have a tendency not to want to participate unless we get them going and give them opportunities to talk about. This might be an excellent opportunity to show different kinds of fire alarm. Maybe you do have a very sensitive feature, a home, a gas well, anything that needs to be protected. You can talk about different kind of control line, where a disk line maybe might work well on the rest of the unit except around this feature here. And for whatever reason, before you go out and burn the unit, this is an area that you want to go black line around. Put in a 4-foot black line around the whole area to protect it, and so that you're not concentrated doing that on the day of the burn. So really the world's the limit. It just depends on how you want to set up, what are your goals and objectives, and how do you want to move forward. One of the things I didn't bring with me today, but I don't have, is on my home unit, I just bought a bag of little green army men that you see in the store. Always at the eye level of the children, because that's they always say, "Mommy, Daddy, let me buy it, buy." But anyway, so you kind of get down there, find it in any grocery store, a bag of army men, and you can talk about different ignition techniques, how to align your people, and I'll just use the fire engines here. Let's pretend that these are people, and talk about ways to light, how you would use your resources, stagger them out inside the unit. Fairly typical in Kansas that we start on the downwind corner and you just have one person lighting right along the line. That's a great way to do it. Depending on smoke management objectives, holding resources that people have, sometimes we'll have 2 people in. And the reason why we have 2 people in this unit, if this was the downwind control line, getting all the pressure from the heat, is we want to widen it as quickly as possible. Let's not have time to let the fire back all the way in. We want to widen it quickly. So you could explain that you would have your lead lighter lighting right along the control line, whatever control line that is, with the second lighter coming in behind him, widening the line. You'd actually put a 3rd person in a little bit wider and quickly establish a downwind perimeter. Things you want to focus on in this situation is communication, making sure that all 3 lighters understand what their jobs are. You want to make sure they understand that they can't get too aggressive, that your inside lighters can't get ahead of your downwind lighter, your first lighter, because then you're going to push fire over the top of them. So these are things, safety things to talk about, and how to light. Make sure that they're staggered, make sure they have a good distance. They understand that the first lighter right on the control line needs to be right on the control line. The second lighter in could be 4 or 5 feet, depending on the fuel height, burning conditions, all different kind of things. It can be a little bit farther in, and then the 3rd lighter and subsequent lighters can be farther and farther in to make a wider downwind control line. The other benefit to using multiple lighters on the downwind control line is some smoke management issues. You can actually What smoke tends to do in Kansas, especially in the more open areas out west, is drift quite a ways downwind before it lifts. By getting a little bit more aggressive on your downwind perimeters, put a little more fire around, you can actually get the fire to pop up a little bit. And especially if you have a structure like a house here, you can. It's pretty common you're going to have houses everywhere. It's fairly common you're going to hit some houses with some smoke, but by doing it this way, you minimize the amount of time and the amount of smoke that hits some of those downwind features. So there's opportunities to use different ignition techniques within the sandbox scenario. Let them think through the process. Why would they want to do that? Some of the things that they need to capture in a burn plan. I do want to talk about one more cool thing is Kansas has a pretty good history of rumor. Kansas has been known as a pretty flat state. That's not necessarily the case. We do have some areas that we have lots of topography. And as I mentioned at the start, one of the great things about the sandbox is, especially if I had a water bottle here, I could make some terrain. We can talk about some of how to put a fire line in. And in this example, we'll just say this is a bluff here, and we want to burn everything off to the right. Where we want to put a fire line in, not necessarily do you want to put it right on the edge. On top of your ridge line here, you kind of want to go off to the downwind side a little bit, because as we know, with the winds, they tend to want to funnel, roll over a ridge line, and so you kind of want to have your control lines on the back side of any kind of topography relief in order to minimize the amount of smoke and potential for spot fire on the other side. The other thing is you can do in this example is show how in this situation where we have kind of the wind coming from the right to the left across the box, we do have a little bit of a saddle here. It's kind of a low area in a ridge lane. We can tell them, we can show them that the fire is going to funnel, the heat and the wind's going to funnel through the saddle, and it's going to be much more intense down here than it is even up on the ridge top. So this is an area where we might want to have a wider line, for example, greater control line, greater holding risk in these topographic areas. These areas of low, where the wind's going to funnel in, and you can use that as an example of how would you create a control line, or where would you place a control line in those types of situations. And you might even talk about how to light through those areas. It might be necessary that as you move lighting, let's say we're lighting from the left to the right across the unit here, when you come to that area, that saddle down low here, is you might need to stop and go to the bottom and light uphill in both directions in order to more safely light that area here. So those things, again, you give the students to talk through, capture other thoughts, and then once they're finished, go back and talk about it as a group and find ways that maybe that was good, this was not so good, how can we improve that doing business there. So again, and you can set the scale of the unit. Let us pretend that we're burning a unit in Kansas City, a county park in Kansas City, the greater Kansas City metropolitan area. And you can set up your sandbox to any scale you want to. It doesn't have to be small like we're talking here. We can talk significant area. In smoke management, we need to have both local adjacent areas, then we need to be thinking 10 or 12 miles downwind when we're talking smoke management. So let's set up a little, 1,500 acre county park here in the Kansas City area, and in that we want to burn 400 acres. And when we talk about smoke management, it's a great way to identify areas that might be impacted. We know that we have an airport. We know we have an airport north of the unit. The Kansas City International Airport. This could be, I-435, kind of runs around. You could kind of set the scale. You could say that maybe this was 2.5 miles northwest of the unit as I-435. And this is a pretty extreme example, but this happens to be one that we're working on with the Kansas Forest Service right now. So we're using that as an example of smoke management. How would we use a sandbox to teach smoke management? Well, you can show a great scale here and say, boy, you could do it at any unit. You could be in Reno County, Kansas. You could have Hutchinson in the hospital and the local airports, or whatever you're burning at, to set up a local example and say, well, obviously we need to worry about those homes which are right next to the burn unit. Those are obvious, but 2.5 miles out we got an interstate. 8 miles north we have an airport. That's still within an area that we need to be concerned about. When we're talking smoke management, we need to be going a minimum of 10, 12 miles down airstream and looking at potential impact. So this is a great example to show, you know, a great way to show how to look at a bigger smoke management at a bigger picture, and how to set up some of the concerns that we may have regarding smoke management. Another thing is, another tool, another way to use it is that we're not the only ones burning in the state of Kansas at any one time. Probably we're burning, our neighbor burning, and our neighbor's neighbor's burning. And you could show that example. And in my example, I'm going to take one of these little trees, and we'll call that a burn. That's a little, let's say it's a 300-acre burn there, and down over here to the west, we've got another little 300-acre burn. Again, your job is to set up the situation as best you can. And then over here we got another little 300-acre burn, and in this situation we have a wind that's over here coming out of the southeast again. You know, any one of these burns by themselves, if we burn just by itself, is probably not going to impact any one place overly bad. But you can take some yarn and you can kind of say, well, this is the smoke path of this burn here, and you do the same thing with these other examples. Here's the smoke trajectory of this burn here. And then you can use the same thing with other yarn and say, here's the smoke trajectory from that burn. And it's easy to see that maybe just by this burn alone is not going to impact Hutchinson, Kansas very much, but these two burns combined, you now are in the smoke trajectory of two different burns. You're going to double the impact or amount of smoke that one place is going to set. And then if you go out here far enough, you'll find that all of a sudden you're in all three smoke trajectory of all three of these 300-acre burns. So instead of hitting one place with 300 acres of smoke, you're now hitting one place with 900 acres of smoke. So you can see how some of those things need to be considered. You might have a great burn day, but all of a sudden you find that your two other neighbors are burning, and maybe it's not a good burn day for you because of the amount of smoke that should be put out will only be multiplied by your neighbor's smoke. And you could really be impacting somebody downstream quite a bit. As you set it up, as you go through the lesson plans, have very, very well-defined goals and objectives on what you want to teach for that particular unit, whether it's contingency planning. That's one thing that I didn't talk about, but let us say that we have that row of walnut trees that your neighbor has planted, has been tending for the last 50 or 65 years, high-value commodity that we don't want to put fire into. And your burn unit might be 2 miles down, 2 miles to the south of it, but you want to burn it with a south wind, so you know that potentially if you do have an escape, and this is, of course, we're making the worst case scenario, this is all CRP grass here with no kinds of breaks, 100%, 2 miles, nothing but 4-foot high grass, all the way to this very sensitive feature, in this case a walnut farm. Well, what are you going to do? What kind of time frames are you talking about? You know, you could easily say that you probably have about an hour before that fire, under light wind conditions, you're going to have about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour before the fire can get here. But your VFDs are an hour and a half away. Maybe that's an opportunity in the planning process to say, we can't burn that with the south wind. We got to burn it with any kind of wind except the south wind. We can use a north wind or east wind or west wind. And that helps you define your prescription a little bit, depending on the contingency planning that you need. So it's a good way to set up the unit, talk about contingency planning, smoke management as we talked about, but set up the unit well, have very well-defined goals and objectives, then you facilitate, as the instructor, facilitate the discussion, kind of put one person in the hot seat, ask them to talk about, go through it in their mind, just talk out loud, encourage them just to talk out loud, just kind of like what I'm doing right here for this thing. Talk out loud, go through the example, kind of hold everybody else to date, all the other students, and then when they're finished is go through kind of a rehab, an after action review if you'll allow, and kind of go over the good points, ask for some suggestions, some other things to do that you might do differently, and then at the end of the time, end of the day, after the end of the exercise, the intent is that they'd be able to go back, capture the thoughts, and put it on a piece of paper in the burn plan. It's part of the planning process.